Certain parts of the country immediately evoke their own style. Southwest is warm colors, sand, dry breezes, and geometric patterns. I'm here today with author Sara Oehler, who's going to show us how to make a beautiful Southwestern-inspired bracelet. Welcome, Sara.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Katie.
Of course, we're happy to have you. And this is a beautiful piece we're gonna make.
It is, yeah. I did it on a knitting spool, and I'm super excited to show you guys how to make it.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about the knitting spool itself, because it isn't something we're so familiar here with on the show.
Okay.
And I have used a knitting spool for knitting,
right,
but not so much for jewelry.
Yeah, definitely. So there are different kinds of knitting spools, and the one that I'm using today has 4 pegs, but there's also a 3-peg and a 5-peg option, and that'll just change how thick or thin the output is, depending on how many pegs there are. But today we're right in the middle. We're using a 4-peg knitting spool, and we're gonna do 3 different colors of wire on it, which I think will be really fun, and they're Southwest colors, so it'll really bring a lot into the design.
Makes me feel right at home.
Right.
You and your ex-home.
I know, yeah, I miss Phoenix.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm sure Phoenix misses you too.
I know,
It's a nice way to bring the colors into, you know, like that nostalgia for places you've been or places you've lived. Definitely. These are beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a citrine color, a turquoise color, and then a red jasper color. And they are inspired by those gemstones. So it's perfect in a design like this where you're trying to get that very Southwest look. You can get these really great colors that match it.
Yeah, I think the fun part about using colorful wire is you can create color palettes that, like you said, inspired by gemstones, inspired by your outfit, inspired by your favorite, you know, pattern.
Yeah,
there
definitely.
Are lots of fun ways to go.
Yes. Okay. And on the knitting spool, you don't have to use 3 colors, but I'm using 3 colors today.
Okay. So how do we get started?
Okay, so we're just going to get some wire out from all 3 of our spools. And you're gonna send the wire down the center of the knitting spool. And you're gonna pretend like it's 1 wire, even though we're using 3. So I'm gonna take all 3 wires and bundle them together as if they're 1 wire. And I'm just gonna shoot it down the center of my knitting spool till it comes out the bottom. And when it comes out the bottom, you're just gonna pull it up with your thumb and sort of anchor it down. And then we can start winding around our pegs. Let me get just a little bit more wire out of these spools and we will be good to go. Okay, so to wind around, we're gonna go around our peg, our first peg, through the center and over to the next peg. And we're gonna do that on every single one of the pegs. Wind around. Once we have a loop on every single one of the pegs, that's when we're gonna come around the top of the knitting spool and the outside top. So instead of going around, as I did before, I'm coming on the outside of this first loop. I'm gonna anchor it down with my finger, and then you have to give just a little bit of leeway from the bottom with your thumb. And you're gonna take your stylus, which comes with a knitting spool, because it's what pulls the wire out, up and over and into the center. Now, it's a little chaotic at first because you'd have to hold on to everything because the wire will just go
well, bloop, it has a mind of its own,
if you let go. But once you've gone 1 loop over, then you can let go and relax a little bit. And then it just becomes a very relaxing hobby where you're just taking these 3 bottom wires and bringing them up and over the top, and then just gently tugging on your tail at the end. And you just keep going in that same pattern, grabbing your 3 wires and going up and over the whole time. So I'm using 1 style of knitting. There's actually other styles of knitting you can even do on the knitting spool. I really like this one because I like the shape that it makes in the output. So it's one of my favorites. And then as you go, you'll start to see your pattern kind of forming down the center of the knitting spool. And if you keep going and going, eventually what's gonna happen is you're gonna have a tail pop out of knitted beading wire. And that looks like this.
Awesome.
So you can see this is where I was knitting from, down the center, and then it comes out. So I have a 6-inch wrist, so I knit 6 inches of beading wire. And that's about the right size for me with the size of clasp that I'm using. So if you have a 7-inch wrist, you might knit 7 inches and kind of match your wrist size. It does have spring to it, so sometimes I don't even use a clasp. I'll just roll it over my hand, which is nice.
And about how long of a tail do you need to leave?
Oh, I usually leave a pretty good distance just to be on the safe side, but at the least, I would say at least 4 inches. This is probably longer at 6 inches just to be really comfortable and know I've got enough room to make my attachment. So I've got my 3 wires that I've cut off the spool, and to finish this off, what I'm gonna do is going in the same way that I was before. I'm gonna take all 3 of these wires and I am going to slip them inside the loop that is on the peg. And I need to do that on all 4 of those. So I'm just following along the same direction, and I'm gonna take all 3 wires and slip them inside. And keep going.
It's neat to see it all come together.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, they're really fun bracelets. I love to do them in lots of different colors. They're really cool. And I love how spongy they are, that they have like a little bit of stretch to them even though they're on a wire. And you can use other materials on these knitting spools too. It doesn't have to be wire, which is cool.
Well, and it's nice that you can work directly from the spool if you are using beading wire. You don't have to measure and cut.
Right.
You know, you kind of see how it evolves.
Sure, yeah.
And then measure the actual piece itself instead of your material.
Right. I've got this one wire that just doesn't want to behave itself, of course. There we go. So I'm going to pull all my wires through, and then I just slip these wires off of the pegs. All of them. And then it's sort of like a drawstring bag. You just pull on it, and it pulls the ends together. And then to finish it off, we're just going to take all 3 wires, and we're going to string a 2x2 millimeter crimp tube. Which 3 of these wires will fit through. I'm using the 0.019 inch beading wire, by the way.
Okay, but you could do it with any diameter.
Any diameter, absolutely.
And, you know, the color wires, sometimes I get a little bit concerned that I have to be extra careful with them. But the knitting tool that you're using has these pieces here that don't cause any abrasion on the wire.
Right,
and so
yes.
You know,
yeah.
it's no worries.
Yeah, the knitting spool has very nice, nice construction for sure. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and crimp. So I'm using the regular crimping pliers. There are 2 little holes in the crimping pliers. And the back hole has a little tooth that's gonna create a divot in my crimp tube. And then I'll turn it on its side in the rounder and crimp it again. And I can go around it a few times, just kind of tightening it down. And then I'm just gonna clip off 2 of these wires. So I'm gonna clip off the citrine, and I'm gonna clip off the turquoise.
Do you kind of choose the ones that aren't coming straight out of the center? Seems like there's always one that's sort of positioned in the center.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll think about the color that I want to show that's attaching to the clasp too. And this is maybe the most of the unobtrusive of the colors. So, so I've got my wire. I'm gonna string it through my cone, and the cone will actually come down over the top of the knitted wire.
Nice.
And if there's any, just, you know, it's not always perfect on the end. Anything not perfect, the cone really hides that imperfection. And then I'm just gonna do that same thing. I'm gonna crimp on the other end, but this time with just 1 wire, and attach to my clasp.
Perfect.
And go back into my crimp, just like you would with a normal bracelet. And get it pretty close, but you always want to leave a little flexibility when you're crimping and attaching to something so that the clasp can kind of move around. And
well, and you want to be sure that it's loose enough for the toggle to fit through the ring.
Definitely, yes. Yeah, very good point. I'm going to crimp the same way that I did last time. So I'm making my divot, and then I'm going to turn it on its side and go round it in. And then last but not least, after I trim my wire, I'm just going to add a quick crimp cover on there just to make it really feel finished. And I can do that. A crimp cover is like a little open-faced bead. And I like to use the rounder in my crimping pliers, and I can just slip it over the top of that crimp and then just very slowly close it. I like to go nice and slow so I can make sure it's straight, because crimp covers sometimes will sort of turn.
Right.
And if you can catch it early, you can fix it. You know, you can kind of maneuver your pliers. But if you do it too fast, sometimes they just, and then I tuck. So I tuck to one side, and then I'm gonna tuck the other side so it's nice and tight. And that's how you would finish it off, and you'll just do the same thing.
Yeah, we can
on
take
the
a look
other
at this one
side.
and see the other end. That is
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thank you.
What a great piece of work.
Thank you. I
You're
love
welcome. Let's take a look at some of these amazing examples that you brought.
Thank you.
The bracelets show some different variations of how you could choose different colors, choose to add
Diameters.
beads. Those are fantastic. And this piece is really different.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I love it.
Yeah, I really like it. I actually was making a bracelet, and it was too short. The wire was just a little too short, and so I put on my creative hat. And
Ingenuity.
yeah, decided to put that together as a necklace, and I love it. It's one of my favorite pieces that I've made.
It's really, really pretty. And I love the way that you combine the different types of metal with the
Thank you.
white color of wire. And then let's just take a quick look at the other pieces before we go. Sarah, thank you so much. This was
I
great.
loved being here. Thanks for having me, Kate.